Hi everyone, welcome back to our channel. Today we are joined by Dr Florence Sheen. Flo completed her PhD at the University of Liverpool and she also worked as a demonstrator. She is now working as a research fellow at the National University of Singapore.
So, can you tell us a bit about your background and how you got into research?
Sure. So I started at the University of Liverpool doing my undergraduate degree in psychology. So it's Bachelor of Science, and I had done a psychology A level, but obviously the way it works with the undergrad is they kind of start you from the bottom up. So I kind of did a whole overview of psychology in the first year, and then the same with second year, and then third year I had a bit more choice over modules. So that's where I got into appetite and obesity. I did a module on that. And a few other things like conflict psychology, and got to kind of get into more of the subjects I was interested in and more kind of an applied science. I think that's where I knew I wanted to be in research because I was much more keen on the applied stuff than the fundamentals. So I was really about making those changes. I first got kind of introduced to research, I suppose, when I did an internship as part of my second year summer. So my supervisor PhD had about 4 internships going, and I was lucky enough to get one of those. And work with him for the summer, and that kind of then turned me on to research. I really enjoyed working with that department. The PhD students were lovely to me, and we did some cool projects together and even got a paper out of it. And yeah, from then on I was really hooked. And because I had that relationship with him, we then decided to go for a PhD, and that's where the demonstratorship came in. So it was a good way of having a role, and a teaching role, and getting that experience and having obviously that wage coming in as well, and then having your PhD and your freedom to do what you wanted to do. So that's where I went for the demonstratorship and got it. So.
And you have 2 interviews, don't you, for the demonstrator positions rather than just your standard one interview?
Yeah, so you'll have you kind of have the PhD interview and the teaching interview. Mm-hmm. I remember being very nervous, but actually the whole interview experience was pretty nice. They were people from the department who maybe you would be seeing in lab meetings or collaborating with. So they were very interested to know about you and hear what you're about, considering you might be a student in the department for a while. Usually you write a kind of proposal or a protocol, at least kind of roughly how you think your PhD might look, or the kind of plans you and your supervisor have at that point. Obviously, they're not set in stone, they can change, but it's just to show that you've kind of thought about the planning process and the fact that it's 3 years and what 3 years of work looks like. And then the teaching side of things, then you have the teaching interview, which will be the same, a kind of 3-panel situation, where really they're just interested to hear about how you're going to make that material engaging for students, and also how you're going to support students to learn that material, because that is your role. You are supporting the lecturers and teaching the students. So how are you going to do that? And kind of, if there's any difficult situations as an academic advisor, how are you going to handle that? What are the channels you need to use? What kind of signposting, and that kind of thing. So it's tough having 2 interviews, but they went quite quickly. And yeah, if you have a lovely department like Liverpool, then it's totally fine.
I think there's quite a bit of a grey area sometimes when describing a PhD student and a demonstrator. So can you just talk a little bit about what the difference is between the 2?
Yeah, so really the main difference is how you're funded. So as a PhD student, you're like usually a full-time student, say. Your time is completely dedicated to your PhD. You'll receive a stipend, that'll be X amount, and that'll be you. Whereas the way I did it, it was part-time PhD and then part-time teaching as the demonstrator. So the way it worked with us is the department essentially kind of covered the PhD costs and then paid me for the teaching. So it worked out as, I think, roughly, maybe slightly less than what the PhD students were on, but pretty much the same wage there, but it was just a slightly different way of doing it. And this way, it wasn't there was no external funding or anything like that. It was just the department's funding. So Eric and I and Charlotte and I had the freedom to do what we wanted to do research-wise. Obviously, that doesn't mean you've got part-time teaching on your hands. And usually that lasts for about 4 years. So you've got a teaching contract for 4 years. And obviously a part-time PhD is 7 years. So no one really wants to do PhD in 7 years for some reason. So usually they cut it down to 4, and that can be quite a challenge. So that's probably the most challenging bit, I think, is having that kind of 7 years squished into 4 with the teaching on top. but I am testament that it can be done. So if I can do it, y'all can do it.
What made you choose to be a demonstrator rather than a PhD, or was it just the opportunity that was available?
Honestly, it was a bit of both. So it was kind of the opportunity was available because I already knew Eric from the research before, and we kind of knew how each other worked. We had a good working relationship, so it made sense to work with him on my PhD from the get-go. But I did get offered a chance to go with another individual department on a PhD, and that would have been a funded scheme. So that was like a 3-year funded situation. And I did have to really think between the two and really balance. And in the end, I did kind of go with, well, I know him and I want to work with him, so I will. But also I kind of thought, well, it's a bit of an edge as well, having the demonstratorship, having that load of teaching and that load of experience. And even as a PhD student, there are opportunities to do teaching and get teaching experience, but I have felt in interviews that it has given that bit of an edge. So I am glad that I did go down that route, but it's definitely not for everyone. I think there's pros to each, and it really, if you get offered both or you have a chance to do both, really weigh it up and think about it. It would be my advice.
Yeah.
So you mentioned a little bit about the timelines. So can you talk a little bit about how long on average does it take a demonstrator to complete their PhD, and how long did it take you to complete your PhD?
Okay, it feels like a bit of a how long is a piece of string to me, because I have had so many different experiences. I've had people finish 3 months earlier, which I just blew my mind. I've had people kind of finish on time, which is, I guess, me. And then people who've maybe then taken that year to write, or one of those years to write, and have kind of had another research role going on. And then they've just taken a good amount of time to really think about and write the thesis. So maybe it's been then a 5-year or a 4.5-year rather than 4 years or less than 4. But yes, I started mine in the November and I handed in end of September. So yeah, I was just slightly early, which was no easy feat, I've got to say. I wouldn't recommend doing that. If you do need to use that time, then use that time. I think there was this kind of this worry or this panic in people who tended to go over that mark, and I don't think it's necessary. If you need more time to do your thesis, then, and you cannot take that time, then do take that time.
How did you find balancing the PhD and the demonstrator role?
It was interesting balancing the two. And the first year felt a bit mad, and then I kind of got more used to it. But the advice I used to give other demonstrators was it was almost like a pick your battle situation. You couldn't expect to get loads of PhD work done in a semester, for example. You wouldn't get loads of writing done because you just got so much on, or if there's marking, I'd usually try and align my PhD timetable around the teaching. So I'd have, during the teaching weeks, I'd have just testing time in the lab. So it kind of very easily slot into my working day. It was kind of a routine thing, so you just got through it. And then when there was Easter break or Christmas break or summer break, that was the time where you could sit and think and write without having to worry about all the little teaching duties. So it was kind of, trying to allocate and bend your time, but also don't stress yourself that I'm not doing any writing or I'm not getting anything done, because that's just the nature of the demonstrator role. You will have teaching heavy times and you'll have PhD heavy times. So that's kind of how I balanced it, I think.
So you mentioned a little bit before about there's pros and cons to each. So can you tell us a little bit about the pros and what the benefits are of doing a demonstrator position as opposed to just being a full-time PhD student?
So in terms of the pros, the main pro for me, 2 main pros really, was obviously the experience side of it. So the way it kind of, I felt it gave me an edge to the PhD that wasn't there. And in interviews and such, that they'll ask me about time management and I can say, well, I've lost it completely, mate, because I'm so good at time management now. I've done these different bits of teaching, got the chance to do lectures, I got the chance to kind of build parts of modules. So it really felt like I got a good experience there. And also for me, it was kind of, and I actually didn't think of this before, Charlotte, when you asked me, but this was a reason for me eventually going with the demonstratorship, because of the way I am myself. I knew if I was just on the PhD track, I would actually find it pretty tough and draining. And sometimes having the kind of balance of 2 different things, and having your students and that experience, and then having your alone time, the PhD, it actually is kind of a nicer balance, rather than just feeling like you're kind of isolated. You can run the risk of getting into as a PhD student. Yeah. So I think, I really enjoyed the social also side of the teaching and getting to be a part of the department more than I would have been, I guess, as a PhD student, because students knew who I was lecturers knew who I was, and it just gave it a different atmosphere, I think.
Yeah.
And you get invited to both Christmas parties, so that's definitely a pro.
That is a pro.
Do you remember? Yeah.
Yeah.
Would you say that there were any negatives for the demonstrator role?
Yeah, there were definitely there were times, for example, where I did feel very kind of maybe stretched. Maybe there was a lot of marking on, and I had a few deadlines with writing or publishing, and I kind of felt like I needed to push those. Or maybe, you know, data collection was getting really intense, and I had a lot of teaching on. And I do remember there was a time when I was running 2 studies and teaching, and that felt a bit crazy. But you know, I got through that and it passed. I think the main thing really, and unfortunately I didn't suffer this, but if you have a supervisor who doesn't really understand the pressure on your time and the fact that it's torn between 2 things, but also who isn't protective of you. So I fortunately had a supervisory team who kind of appreciate that I was busy, appreciate that I had teaching, but if they ever felt that I was getting too much work or I was having to work crazy hours or weekends, they would be like, no, Flo's a PhD student as well, she needs this time, it's protected, it's half and half. So they would be that person who would maybe step in and make sure I was protected, when as a PhD student I might not feel like I had the power to say that. So I think that's the only time that it can be a struggle, is if you and your supervisor aren't on the same page there.
For somebody that might be in a position that you were in, so they might have been offered a full-time studentship and they might have been offered a demonstrator position as well, what are the things that you would say to them about trying to make a decision between which one they'll go for?
I'd say that the main thing, the top thing is, I mean, obviously you're going to be with that one subject and getting right into it for 3 years. So whichever one of the 2 you go for, make sure you are very, very passionate and interested in it, because by the end of it, you won't be. You'll feel like, why did I ever choose this? Even about your most loved subject. So yeah, I think you really need to have that passion and drive to keep going through those times where you feel like it is all a bit crazy. So that's the main thing. Just make sure you do really care about it. If you know the person well, as I say, I knew Eric pretty well, so that was a bit of a sway for me. If you do have someone who you kind of know how they supervise people, you know how they work, or maybe if you know one of their students, you can go and kind of chat with them over coffee and just say, you know, what's so-and-so like, how was your working day, you know, do they answer emails, things like that, you know, like all the little things. How do meetings work, how often do they meet? Because you might have a person who only wants to meet their students once a month, whereas fortunately Eric and we used to meet once a week, and that was perfect for me. So it's kind of all those little working relationships as well. If you can find out whether your supervisor is a good fit for you, then that's a good thing to check. And finally, kind of, I guess, down to the kind of person you are. I liked the idea of having the mix up of the teaching and something else going on, but maybe you're a person who would just prefer to have kind of control of your own time, the PhD side of things, maybe to have more involvement with stakeholders, for example. I didn't really do that. It was just in the School of Psychology. It was more kind of thinking and doing research within the university. Whereas if you had external funders, there might be a chance to collaborate across other universities or other companies, and that might be something that you really feel passionately about and want to do. So I think, yeah, it's also about what kind of person you are and what kind of PhD you want to make for yourself, what kind of experience you want to have.
You mentioned being passionate about the subject, so what was your PhD about?
So I looked at plate clearing tendencies and food waste concerns as reasons for why we have consumed from larger portions. So these haven't been looked at before. They've kind of been briefly dipped into, but not to this extent. So I kind of provided like a thorough review of them and a study of those 2 things. I also created a scale to measure food waste concerns in an eating context. And I did, I think, 7 studies over the PhD, kind of trying to build up that story. So there's still a bit more to be done. There's always future research to be done. But yeah, I was pretty happy with hopefully the start I've made on that subject.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about what your job is now and how you found out about it?
Yes, so the role I'm in now, so I work for a company called A-STAR, which is the Agency of Science Technology Research in Singapore. So even though we're quite closely linked to the National University and to the National Hospital of Singapore, it's like its own kind of research entity. And I work in the SIFB department, which is Singapore Investigative Food and Biotechnology Innovation, which just rolls off the tongue. It's quite a mouthful. So I'm working for them as a research fellow. At the moment, I'm looking at consumer acceptance and barriers to acceptance for alternate proteins. And how I found out about this, Actually, as a PhD student in the eating department, there was this conference we go to every year, which is the British Food and Drink Conference, the BFDG, and we used to have like this mailing list. It's quite a nice conference for PhD students. There's a lot of PhD supervisors there and postdocs there, so they have a habit of sharing any job information or any roles they kind of come up. So that's actually how I found out about the role. But I knew about Kieran from this conference as well, because I'd seen him present before. So I already knew he had a lab in Singapore and was already tempted anyway. And then, the role came up and I was lucky enough to get it. So yeah, I'm really pleased. There were a few delays, obviously, with COVID, what a year it's been. But I'm finally here and I've finally started.
Originally, what was it that interested you in your role now?
So in terms of the role now, I won't lie, the Southeast Asia thing was a big pulling factor, because I also did a semester in Hong Kong as part of my undergrad. I really enjoyed the whole experience of kind of living independently in a country by myself and kind of exploring it and everything. So I was kind of keen, if I can get a chance to go and study abroad or live abroad again, that'll be something I want to do. So there was that. Also, as I say, I knew of Kieran. I'd already heard about him. I'd seen him present. I'd heard his work, read his work, and I knew from my supervisors, they knew him as well, that he was a good researcher. He had a good team that was kind of being built up in Singapore. So SIFB actually only rebranded itself to SIFB in April. So they've kind of now become like their own thing. So they're kind of building and building all the time. So it seems a good place to be for that front of kind of being at the cutting edge of everything. Yeah. They have very, very cool labs here as well. So I'm quite excited about the tech they've got. And it's kind of almost different to a university, because I guess they do have, being a company, there's more funds and grants and stuff going on. So it does feel like there's a lot of things I can be involved in. Yeah. And also with a research fellow, I do get the flexibility to kind of run my own studies that I want, and I can kind of sit and think and decide what kind of things I want to look at over the fellowship. So yeah, I do have that freedom again as well, which was quite important to me. And you don't always get that in a postdoc. Sometimes it's prescribed, which can be a good thing, can be a bad thing. But in this case, there's a bit more freedom there, which I do like.
What are the types of things that you do day to day?
At the moment, because I'm only kind of up and starting stuff, we're preparing to do a scoping review on this topic. So I'm kind of just like prepping for that, prepping materials, doing a bit of reading and kind of planning how that's going to look. Mm-hmm. And it's quite long hours here. I'm kind of 8 o'clock till 5:30 or 8:30 till 6 in the office. So yeah, at the minute it's just like that and the odd meeting just to kind of arrange how this project's going to look, because it's in collaboration with a New Zealand university. So we have a lot of chats with them to kind of sort it out. And then I have weekly meetings with Kieran. And so yeah, it's been pretty relaxed so far. I think it'll kind of hike up once I start to get the ethics through and all that kind of thing. Yeah. But right now it's just like the planning process, just a lot of kind of sitting and thinking and deciding how the 2 years are going to look, I suppose.
Yeah. What's your plans after the 2 years? Do you have any long-term goals or ideas what you want to do?
In all honesty, I've never been one for long-term planning. It's always something that's eluded me a little bit. But I think because whenever I'm asked this in interviews or someone asks me, I always kind of say, like, I'm passionate about doing research into improving health, usually through food. So as long as I'm doing that in some capacity, and finding a way to still work with people, whether it be kind of part of the job or as a side thing, then I'll be happy, really.
Yeah.
So maybe I'll still be in Singapore in 2 years' time. Maybe I'll go somewhere new. Yeah.
See what's out there.
Happy to see what happens. Yeah.
For people that are considering staying within academia and going down the lecturing route, would you say that PhD students are at a slight disadvantage to demonstrator students because of all of the student interaction and the teaching and the marking and things that you do as a demonstrator?
Yes, as a demonstrator, you do have that kind of that pro of just the amount of experience you have. And if you are kind of quite a go-getter as a demonstrator, then you can try and be involved in those modules. You can try and do lectures. You can say, oh, can I help you reshape this module? You can kind of use those opportunities, and it can make you quite competent for a lecturer post. But I do believe the same can be done as a PhD student. I guess it just takes a bit more work because you'll have to try and find those opportunities to teach on modules. It's all about just building the experience on paper. So I think it's maybe harder to do. You've got to graft a bit more, but you can still bring yourself to that level. And then you might have things that other students at the demonstrators or other PhD students won't have had. So every PhD is different, and I think always comes with its own set of skills. Maybe you've learned a new stats software as part of your PhD, or maybe you've got a chance to work with a particular company that's giving you a kind of whole other set of skills in terms of grant management and things like that. So I think you can always pull on those skills, but as a PhD, that is the one thing you maybe don't get as much teaching experience unless you kind of go get it.
Yeah. And did you have any sort of training before starting in terms of how you manage students and how you mark and grade assessments, or did you really just start and kind of learn as you go?
It was a bit of a start and learn as you go when I started. Now it's different. We've kind of set up training for them, and we kind of now have a system where if you start as a demonstrator your first semester and your second, I think actually you're kind of like shadowing an older demonstrator. So for example, when I was in my fourth year, a girl shadowed me who was in her first year. So she kind of would be with me for any of my teaching, kind of paired up with me, and she'd observe how I handled academic situations and stuff like that as an academic advisor. I kind of had to do a hit the ground running and just kind of go for it. But it's a lot more structured now, and I think you can kind of obviously, if you do have no experience in teaching, obviously I was quite lucky that I had been a student there, so I knew how the classes went and I kind of knew the general bits and bobs that you needed to know. But you could obviously shadow with the teachers of the students and just say, can I watch your lecture this week? Or I'm not too sure how I'd handle questions on that topic, and how do you think I'm best pitching this to the students, especially with us because we were teaching stats, and obviously students find that a bit scary and hard. So if there was a particular maybe complex thing that I was maybe worried I might over explain or not explain clearly enough, then I would go to a more experienced demonstrator and say, how would you actually say this to them? Like, how would you explain it in a way that's not going to freak them out? Or do you have any maybe tasks they've used in the past to make it more straightforward or whatever? And we just kind of had that exchange of information. And that was very nice about the demonstrators, actually. It was a very nice community aspect to it. So the older ones would always be up for helping the younger ones. There's always this kind of very nice sharing atmosphere in the department. It's really good.
So what general advice would you give to either a demonstrator or a PhD student just maybe starting off?
I guess I haven't really said it actually out loud, but I've kind of alluded to it, but it's definitely make use of your supervisors, your peers, the people above you, the people in your department. Really make use of those people, because I think they, hands down, are my most valuable asset of the PhD is the people I've met either through conferences or through this the PhD I did at Liverpool. And also a PhD it's hard going. Like, even if you have a PhD where everything goes to plan and goes by the book or finished on time, it's not easy. It's tough on you. So you need to make sure that you build those relationships, not only from a academic kind of work perspective, but also so you have people you can call on for advice, people you can go for cups of coffee with or whatever, just to kind of see you through. So that'd be the big piece of advice, I guess, would be to kind of use those people around you, and make use of the connections you make, because they will be your network for the next at least 5 years until you get the new role, next exciting role after your PhD. And I guess the other thing is, it sounds really cliche and rubbish, but enjoy it, because honestly, I look back and it was such an enjoyable experience. Obviously, there were stressful times, but I loved being a PhD student. I had freedom to do the research I wanted to do. It was exactly what I wanted to do. And you'll never get that again. You'll never really get to do exactly what you want to do and uninterrupted for a 3-year stretch. So I think just really, even at the times when it's tough, try your best to see what amazing challenge you're doing, but also how amazing an experience it is going to be for you.
I guess that is quite difficult, isn't it? I don't know whether you'd say the same, Charlotte, because obviously we're first years at the minute, so we're kind of at that design and just trying to figure everything out stage, that it is hard to remind yourself, because you do enjoy it, but I think when you're so heavily involved with everything that you've got to do, you do forget sometimes that it's an enjoyable experience, and you have to take a step back.
Exactly. And I think that's like what I said about how you'll eventually hate your subject, because sometimes you're just like, why have I decided to look at this? It's why is it, it's nothing working, oh my god. And then you kind of, maybe you go and present your work or you publish and you're like, oh, okay, I remember why I like my research. Yeah, I'm doing something right. It's all going well. Yeah. But it's not a smooth ride for sure. And I think that's completely fine as well. Like, I don't know if you guys felt this, but I definitely felt at times like I was the one who was struggling and finding it hard, and everyone else seemed to have it down into a T. And that is never the case. No matter the most calm person will be having their own PhD journey as well. So I think that's worth remembering. Like, it's not you. You're not a bad PhD student. Everyone has these tough times for sure.
One of the things that I wanted to ask you actually was that you always did a lot, especially with netball, you organised all these sporting things, and the Macmillan coffee mornings and all things like that. Because being a demonstrator, I mean, even just being a PhD student is busy, but being a demonstrator on top of that, how did you find the time to also organise going for, playing sports at lunch and then doing coffee mornings? How did you fit it all in?
No, I don't know. But to be honest, that was probably because they were so important to me, those things, that I made the time. And I think it's worth, especially with sports and stuff, because I used to do a lot of climbing as well. That was kind of my like sport of choice for the PhD. I used to go climbing maybe 3 times a week, along with everything else. And I stuck to that. And it was because you really need that downtime or that change of pace or whatever. So I was always very keen to get people out for netball, because it was like, let's get out of the office. Let's get away from our computers for a second. Let's get out of the stress and have an hour where you won't be thinking about your PhD because you'll be too busy throwing a ball across someone's head and whatever. And it just, that was a way to kind of, I think, deal with any times I was stressed, really. Because I found if I just kind of went home and sat down, I would just be thinking about the PhD. Whereas if I was on the climbing wall, or I was planning the Macmillan coffee morning, or I was thinking about going to work for Alexandra Rose and what I was going to do there, like it was something else to get me out of that and just keep myself happy in a kind of well-being, self-fulfilled kind of way as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think don't let those things slip. Actually, that would be another big piece of advice. Don't let those things slip, because I used to see a lot of PhD students do that. Maybe they'd start off doing lots of fun things and being out a lot at lunch, and then suddenly it'd be like, I can't do this, I can't do that. And it's hard not to get into that trap, but there's always the next day, and you always have time for yourself to do your netball or your coffee or whatever. You always have time.
Lastly, for PhD students and demonstrators that are coming towards the end of their PhD, when would you say is the best time to start looking for opportunities post-PhD?
Right, so the way I did it was, I handed in my thesis at the end of September. So I kind of started roughly looking maybe July, which maybe was quite early, but I wasn't actively checking anything. For example, I set up a few job alerts on a few websites, some certain postdoc websites, a few universities that I was interested in. Sometimes you can sign up for their job position site. So I kind of had a few universities that I was keeping an eye on that I thought I'd want to work with. So I had those alerts coming through. So I could kind of just see what was going on, or at least I could see the kind of roles that might come up and stuff like that. And I had a cover letter written, and I had my CV organised so that if something did come up, then it would be relatively easy for me to just kind of send the stuff in. And then I would only have an interview to prepare for, rather than thinking, I've got to prepare a whole cover letter now. So it wouldn't take too much time away from writing. And then once obviously I handed my thesis in, I then had this stretch until mid-November of time. There was obviously Viva prep, but you can't do 2 months of solid Viva prep. That's not a thing. So at least then I kind of could actually be looking more actively, and everyone knew that I was looking for a job. People knew I was going to finish. So if anyone saw about a job, or my supervisor saw about a job, they were sending it my way. Like with this mailing list for the conference, I was on that. So any kind of list you can get on that might be useful, or even on Twitter as well, you can kind of keep your eye on Twitter, because they always post postdoc roles on there. So then I was kind of more actively looking. But yeah, I'd say if you kind of do it like that, because you don't want to kind of stress yourself out thinking I need a job when my PhD is over, and kind of distract yourself away from the writing. So if you kind of have that approach of just maybe setting up a few alerts, or having a casual look as you get close to submitting, and then you can start looking properly once you've got more time. I was quite lucky actually, all my interviews in the end were after I'd handed in, so it did feel a lot more manageable.
That's all the questions we have. Thank you very much for joining us. I know it's quite late where you are.
But yeah, no, thank you. It's been really nice. And it's kind of nice to remember the PhD and stuff. So I'm sure we'll catch up soon. All right.
Will do. Bye. See you soon.
Bye. Thanks for watching. If you like and subscribe to our channel, our Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and if you hit the notification bell, then you'll know when we post next. See you then.